Hello and welcome to an episode of the Point Forward podcast, Milwaukee Bucks chatter from the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. Ooh, it didn't go well at all in the 2024 NBA playoffs. The season is over. JR was right. Although not for the reasons JR thought. My name is JR Radcliffe. I am the guy who is right, although I don't want to rub anybody's face in that. I'm not happy about the prediction. I'm not happy it went right. I'm joined by Jim Owczarski, my colleague at the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. The Milwaukee Bucks were unable to get past the Indiana Pacers. They lose in 6 games. Obvious storyline there is that injuries maintained a presence there. Giannis Antetokounmpo did not play in the postseason, did not play after April 6th when he incurred that soleus strain, the calf strain, that effectively ended his season. Damian Lillard was able to play some of the games, not all, 2.5, I would say, healthy, even that in parentheses, in quotes, I should say. It basically just never came together for the Bucks. They were able to kind of steal a couple games, but that's the best we got. So, Jim, we're going to talk about it, break it down, look ahead to the next season. I think we'll start here and whether or not you think it's purely unlucky at this point. It was the injuries that got them that kept them from beating the Pacers. On the one hand, it's really easy to look at it that way, simplicity's sake, and on the other, there were a lot of other struggles that I suppose you could argue, well, they could have had the 1 seed or the 2 seed, or not the 1 seed, but the 2 seed, if that might have impacted something. I don't know. I feel like that's a stretch, but do you, when somebody asks what went wrong, is it just as simple as saying they got hurt? Literally nothing they could have done could have prevented that from happening. How would you assess it?
I mean, my first blush answer is yes. I think if Damian Lillard doesn't tweak the Achilles in overtime of Game 3, they probably win that game. Mm-hmm. He couldn't move. Was just everyone kind of wondered in the moment, why are they running all these plays for Chris Middleton in overtime or the end of regulation, even to tie the game? It was because Dame couldn't move. Mm-hmm. If he was fully functioning Damian Lillard, someone other than Chris scores in that overtime and they probably win. If he's healthy for Game 4, they're up 2-1. Do they win there? Maybe. I don't know. Game 5, obviously, they pounded the Pacers without him. Game 6, I do. I mean, they had proven they could beat that team without Giannis. But when your top 2 players are gone, it's really hobbled, that's a problem. And they just didn't have, I know Chris, tried to say, hey, we lost Dante against Miami, we had PJ Tucker ready.
That's not the same thing, though.
That's, look, Dante was a starter that season. It is not the same thing. Giannis getting hurt in the Eastern Conference Finals, also not the same thing because they were clearly the better team than the Atlanta Hawks. That series was already sort of turned in the Bucks' favor at that point. Yeah, it's not quite the same comparisons. They just didn't have enough. And look, that's the hard part of the Big Three construct. And we spoke about this, JR, in the sort of series preview with Giannis being out. It was, maybe this is why you have Dame. Right? And I think that would have borne out, but then Dame got hurt. And all of a sudden, Chris Middleton did all he could. I don't know what else Chris Middleton could have done, but that's, Chris, that's the thing with Chris is like he's a tremendous player, proven, quote unquote, number 2 right after the title. But that's what number 2s are. Like if he wasn't that, he'd be a number 1. Chris Middleton was not going to give you 35 every game. He gave you 40.
Yeah.
And when Dame got hurt, he gave you 4 double-doubles.
He was spectacular.
Plus 5 assists. Like those were like LeBron numbers, like the 20-10-5 stat line. Like that's so hard to do.
And the point isn't that it wasn't enough as like the guy.
Yeah.
It's that there was nobody else. There was nothing there.
Bobby getting ejected was such a huge what a terrible decision on his part and really impacted the game. So, I think they had enough, JR. It was just Dame gets hurt, Bobby gets tossed. Like, it was just the ball was rolling at that point, and they couldn't stop it. Yeah. And it's up to whether maybe we'll get into this, whether John Horst is the GM or not. He is as we record this, so his job is to evaluate the other players and say, hey, okay, what did we do wrong, if that's the word? Because I'm sure he'll say that wasn't wrong. We were constructed for a deep run if these guys stayed healthy. But, okay, what can we do? How else can we buttress this under some restrictions here now, JR, as an apron team to better sustain an injury? But let's be real, man. They can win 65 games next year.
It won't matter.
And if those two guys are hurt,
Yeah. I mean, that's what makes this so frustrating. You can't evaluate it at all. You can't know if all the struggles of going to two different coaches during the season, if finally getting Damian Lillard maybe to a point where he's comfortable with everything. You have no way of knowing if any of that worked, because the point at the end was not the complete picture. I mean, like the Pacers were able to beat the Bucks with Damian fairly healthy in game 2.
Yeah.
So you could at least make an argument that even if everybody but Giannis is at peak strength, that the Pacers at least make it a series, maybe send it to 7. I don't know. Certainly you look at, like you said, game 3 and game 4. Those are the turning points. The Bucks had to make a furious rally to even force overtime. Damian gets hurt in that game. So you'd like to think the Bucks, a couple things swing one way or another, could have won that game. But the Bucks were the ones chasing. They had to hit the buzzer-beating shots to even extend that game. And then game 4, Bobby Portis goes out. Everything is in the trash. You already don't have Damian Lillard and Giannis Antetokounmpo. I mean, we are now talking about a absolutely depleted team. This is a game that should be played against, the Pistons in February.
Right.
Where
Chris and his merry band of misfits were not enough
100%
in that on the road, and they were in it yet. I think that was very much a ball game until the final minute or two.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah. So yes, very easy to say that they advance if Giannis is healthy. But then again, I'm sort of feeling like there was a ceiling on this from the word go, because a healthy Giannis is only in quotation marks. I mean, clearly, if he had come back, he would have been limited in some capacity. Damian Lillard is limited as he's back on the floor. Could this team have gotten healthy for a run to the finals? I guess theoretically, but it feels to me like there was always a ceiling. Might as well get out now, get everybody healthy for the next year. I don't know.
I mean, there's a ceiling in hindsight, JR, because
we know that Giannis would have been out
I got
a
a sense after game 5 or before game 5 that Dame was going to play game 6. Giannis, and then I had someone say Giannis isn't even close, and that was sort of eyebrow raising, but also not, because we haven't seen Giannis, so we're relying on Doc Rivers. And Doc,
very different tact by Doc Rivers. They're close.
Yeah.
Super weird.
And obviously Giannis explained what not close meant, which was weeks, which means his return, if there was going to be one, would be the Bucks getting to the Eastern Conference Finals.
I mean, if that, and good luck.
At that point, I think he would have been 100%. Clearly, when you're talking about where he's at now, that's what it would have been. And I think I had said that before the Pacers series, JR, it was a black and white. It was either he can go all the way or he can't. There was no, I'm 80% type of thing. That clearly was nowhere to be seen. So, could they have, if this was a preview pod of Bucks Knicks and you were to ask me, could they beat the Knicks without Giannis? That'd be tough. I'd probably venture to say no.
Plus, we get lots of hindsight views on Dante DiVincenzo and whether or not he should be in the starting lineup for Milwaukee.
Yeah, and so, in retrospect, JR, I think you're right. There was a ceiling on this. But again, you're talking about the 1, 2, 3rd best player in the world not being on your team. Joe, that's the thing. That's just what it is. And so it is a disappointing end. Giannis was clearly distraught and heartbroken over this and wants to evaluate how he's going to approach things. But to his point, he's like, what does missing a game on November 15th mean if I'm still hurt April 15th?
Right.
He's like, and so he's not wrong in that either. It's really interesting, JR. He played through some leg stuff. We talked about this in later season pods. You mentioned the seeding at the start. He was on the floor when they lost to Memphis and Washington and Toronto and Atlanta. He was part of the crap down the leg whole thing, right? Chris wasn't part of all of it. Dame wasn't part of all of it. Giannis was hurt trying to play through it. In retrospect,
he should not have played those
should they have shut him down and the back end of the season was a total mudslide and they lost 9 in a row or 10 out of 11 and they're the 4 seed? Maybe. But, they tried to get the 2. And if they would have won, and Dame played that game in Orlando and aggravated his Achilles trying to win that 2. And they probably would have been better off playing Miami or Philly, than the up and down Pacers, in retrospect. But they tried. Like, they tried to get there, and it didn't work. And so I think overall, JR, it's the core 4 are what they are. So, how do you fill in the veteran minimums? Who's available? How can they do it differently? Do they keep their 2 draft picks in a crappy draft?
They do not.
Is it Marjan? Is it on? I don't know. I mean, this is all the things on the table now going forward, and but that's what happens when those guys get hurt.
There doesn't appear to be many pathways to improving the fringes of this roster the way that they might need to. It's very easy to say, well, the bench wasn't good enough. Well, no, it wasn't.
Yeah, when you have Bobby Portis starting.
Yeah. You have no bench. You have all your resources in the guys that are, supposed to be stars for you and are injured or are actually already on the floor to start with. So there isn't to improve that bench. You got to make some dramatic changes, and it's probably not worth it. But I want to know what you think the pathways forward are for this team. You mentioned the core 4, including Brook Lopez with the big 3. They're all getting up there. Even Giannis is going to be tasting 30 years old. Obviously I don't think Giannis is old, but everybody is going to be at risk of suffering more injuries down the line. You cannot guarantee that you're going to have those 4 guys at the end of the year. You can't guarantee you have anybody, but I would say there is a greater likelihood that somebody will be dealing with something significant by the end of the year of that 4 than not. It's more likely. Are there trades that can be made? Are there moves that can be made? This has to factor in the aprons and the
right.
salary cap. Like, what are the pathways?
So, I'm not going to bore people with all of the minutia. Well, very simply, the Bucks cannot trade multiple players for a player. So that's why Allen and Drew Holiday for Dame had to happen last summer. Right now, it's a 1-for-1 scenario. Money for money, dollar for dollar.
Because they're above the second apron.
Yes.
This is a punishment for spending too much money on your team.
Yeah, believe it or not, the Milwaukee Bucks are a high payroll, high spending team. And, the other owners and players agreed that they don't want that anymore. And they're going to punish you. And that's one of the restrictions is you can't aggregate deals. So there are no – I'm sure the trade machine will be updated. You cannot put Bobby and Pat in a trade together, right?
The packaging idea is not
that's
happening.
Gone. Now you could trade, like a Brook Lopez for 2 players making $22 million, but in reality, you're not a better team for that. So as it stands, JR, they're gonna run it back. This is sort of a 2-year kind of window with Dame, Giannis extending, Chris, Brook. This is his contract year. Bobby has a year left. Pat Connaughton's probably the guy at $9 million. That can you swap 9s somewhere? Is someone dying for Pat Connaughton? You could argue.
No offense, the other team has to want Pat Connaughton.
Exactly, and so you're not getting 2 younger players for Pat Connaughton. So some of it is developmental. Some of it is Marjan ready? On one hand, JR, I say, under 3 head coaches, he hasn't really found footing. But in fairness, with Doc Rivers, Marjan had been hurt. No one really saw him. He was getting hurt in practice, getting hurt in G League games. Andre Jackson Jr., I think, fouled me as we started this podcast.
But Jim, Doc hates the young guys.
No,
Why isn't he playing Andre Jackson?
And look, Andre and AJ Green are going to play, assuming they're around, because they through 82 games. That's like the Marjan thing, the Marjan minutes. Marjan played a lot early in seasons these last 2 years because guys got hurt, and then he didn't when guys got healthy. So we'll see how Doc manages all that. If those guys are around, they can trade their draft picks on draft day. They did have to swap. They moved down 2 spots with the New Orleans Pelicans to 23. I think their second-round pick this year has not been determined yet. It's still 33 or 34 from Portland. They can trade them draft day. in a very weak draft, as I said. Is there value that, who knows? We'll find out.
There's a chance, by the way, that people have not heard of like the top 5 to 7 picks in this draft.
Yeah.
Like when draft day comes, it's either going to be guys overseas or guys that you didn't even realize were top prospects in college.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting draft.
Yeah,
Keep
next
going.
year's draft is the one. And even then, the Bucks don't control any of their draft picks. What does that mean? They can't trade the 2025 first rounder. Like, it's owed to, is that Portland or New Orleans? It's one of. I mean, they owe the picks and the swaps to Portland and New Orleans, and now they could try to get creative. You can look out to Phoenix and swaps on swaps on swaps. It's like technically a first round pick, but the value is so diminished because now it's just like the swap of a swap or whatever. So really, JR, you're right. Like the limitations are pretty severe. You're looking at really trying to find a Malik Beasley. And for as frustrating as maybe Malik was at times, he was a minimum deal, 27-year-old who shot 41% from three, challenged the Bucks all-time three-point makes in a season, broke Ray Allen's record for most 5 three-point games in it. Like, that was a really great $2 million veteran
total
deal.
bargain. Yeah. I know people were down on him by the end, but
yeah,
like, total bargain.
He and the Bucks are restricted. He's going to hit the open market. All Milwaukee can do with these restrictions, JR, is they can offer him a 4-year deal for like $10 million. Mm-hmm. He's going to get – Grayson Allen is now making $17 million a year. Like, someone's going to pay Malik Beasley because he can make threes. And so now John Horst, or whomever it is, has to find not 35-year-olds. And that's the hard part. Now, maybe what may help the Bucks are – a lot of teams, maybe they're not in aprons or luxury taxes, but they're up against some salary cap stuff. So, maybe there's some other 28-year-olds who are available at $2 million. We will find out. That's yet to be seen. Mm-hmm. But it's going to be scraping the bottoms of barrels, if you will, or, taking, I hate to call it distressed assets, but that's essentially what it is, okay, well, this 27-year-old is maybe not working for us, or this 25-year-old's not working for us. Is Marjan not working for you? Do we just trade those guys for each other and hope
for the best?
Hope that it pops. That's where the pro scouting is really, really going to be important for a team like the Bucks this offseason.
Yeah, this is Danilo Gallinari territory. That's what they're.
Yeah, and you don't look Gallo minutes. Hashtag
great.
Gallo minutes.
He was great.
Look, he helped them win Game 5.
Yeah, for sure.
He helped extend the series. Like, but
the Jeff Teague game.
That was the the Pat Beverly game, right? Mm-hmm. Like, look, you can't, like the Jay Crowder, the Pat Beverly, the Danilo Gallinari, the 35-year-olds. Like, I don't think those guys can come back, JR. And so if there are 34, 35, 36-year-olds who you think can help you, I think they have to be of a different athletic variety, like
sure.
AKA actually athletic.
Yeah, AKA actually athletic, yes. And preferably big, too, if they could arrange that.
And everybody's looking for those guys.
Of course they are, right. John Horst, you mentioned that earlier. I certainly get the vibe that this is it, that he's going to go to Detroit. I mean, that's just the rumblings, like a lot of.
I don't know if
it's
that certain, but yeah.
Well, I don't either. A lot of smoke. I think at this point, I just wrote at jsonline.com kind of the fan reaction. We got a lot of feedback, so summarize some of that. And a little more than half would like to see John Horst back, but I think you brought this up on a previous podcast. Owners want return on their investment. 3 straight years they haven't gone to the Eastern Conference Finals. I personally would not lay that at the feet of John Horst because there is some bad luck. There is some underperformance in there. And John Horst has done wizard's work most of the time to bolster this roster. He built the roster that became a championship roster. I have faith in his ability. He's not an old man who's lost his way. He's still very young. He's still, I'm sure, very capable of adapting and learning. But he's the only guy that they haven't moved on from. If, they tried the coach thing, they tried remastering the roster a little bit. It feels like that maybe there would be a lot of extra pressure on him if he comes back for one more year and maybe he gets a better deal to go to Detroit and try something else. I think that would be kind of a not a flashpoint, but it would be like, oh, the guy who is the architect of the whole thing is abandoning his project, and now what are the Bucks supposed to do now? But at the same time, it might be the best situation. So what do you think? What are you thinking and hearing as it relates to Jon Horst?
Yeah, I mean, look, so for Bucks fans who may not know this, well, they know that Detroit's been terrible for like 20 years.
Yeah.
Their owner, Tom Gores, decided, you know what, this has been really bad of late. I need a president of basketball operations to oversee everything. He's already had his GM in place in Troy Weaver. He already has Monty Williams in place, who he broke the coaching market with a $90 million deal to start of last year. He wants someone to oversee all of that. And, they hired a search firm. They're running a search. They are just now getting to a point where they can request permissions to speak with, executives from teams who were just eliminated. As of this recording, I do not believe they have asked the Bucks for permission to speak to Jon Horst. My understanding is there is mutual interest. Jon Horst is a Michigan native, went to college in Michigan, started his career with the Pistons. It would be a promotion in title. I don't fully understand if he'd be able to fire Troy Weaver and Monty Williams, or if this is a weird kind of bottom-up thing where, like, yeah, you're the president of basketball operations, but we're going to make you work with these guys. Again, it would be a promotion and title. I would imagine a raise. And maybe there's a little bit of heat.
Right.
He signed an extension a couple years ago. He's got a couple years left on that deal here in Milwaukee. Maybe it's a little bit of leverage as well. Maybe it's, hey, make me president of basketball ops on the same level of like a Peter Fagan. Peter Fagan's the president of the team. This is speculation on my part,
Sure,
but like
sure.
these are things I think you talk about or wonder about or pitch, and so we'll see. Like if the Pistons do request permission, will the Bucks grant it? And we'll see how that goes. I think it's just a natural part of success where other organizations who have been less successful are like, hey, what about those guys?
Yeah.
And so I think that's natural, and we'll see how the Bucks react to that. I mean, I think if there was some sort of ownership problem, I mean, we're a few days removed now. I mean, the Bucks were down 3-1. So them losing the series was not really out of the realm of possibility a week ago. So no news has happened.
Yeah.
So we'll see. I mean, I think, it's not – I don't think it's an indictment on the Bucks' future if he were to want to go and try something else. And I don't think it's an indictment on Jon Horst if – ownership were to say go ahead and go, right? Like choose this other opportunity, try to rebuild from the start. So it's kind of interesting. We'll see how that goes. The Bucks, honestly, JR, it's kind of for as good as they have been since Horst sort of surprise promotion, if you will, in 2017. They really haven't had like people poached from the front office.
Yeah.
Darvin Ham got a job.
But even Charles Lee as an assistant coach
so
wasn't
like
given a job.
they really haven't had, the fingers of I mean, they've won the most games of any team in the regular season since 2017.
Wild.
Only Boston have been to more consecutive playoff games. Obviously, there have been 5 different champions the last 5 years. We'll see about Denver this year. So like there could be 6 new champions in 6 years. So like we're in this era of I think Adam Silver called it parity of opportunity or something like that. So it is sort of interesting that like the Bucks haven't tentacled out, if you will. So that's I don't know what that means. So yeah, we'll kind of see who's what happens with that.
The Detroit Pistons went to 6 straight conference finals, and since then have not won a playoff series. 16 years have gone by since they won their last
one
playoff
winning
series.
season in that time. They've been to a couple of playoffs as like with a losing record and a 500 record.
That is well, they did. Yes, they had a 500. They were 44-38 in 2016 . That was
so
their
one
first
winning
round
record.
exit.
Yeah,
but yes, it's been a disaster
since they left. Like Horst was part of that Hammond crew that came to Milwaukee, and just before Giannis was drafted.
Right. So the Pistons went from a team that was contending every year to a team that hasn't contended for 16 years. are the Bucks on a cliff just like that?
Oh my.
Let's activate my doomer sensibilities up in here. I mean, okay, so you can't predict. No one can predict 16 years of futility. No one. However, it's really hard to see. Okay, so next year, you talked about the Timberwolves as a good example, a team that made a trade for Gobert. It didn't really work out, or so it seemed. Yeah, guys were hurt. They were the eighth. They barely made it in play-in. And then the following year, everything clicked. And now here they are, as we record this, have a one-game lead on the Nuggets in the second round of the reigning champs. They look great. They look like an absolute championship contender. The Bucks could easily be back there with that same thing. You know, everybody gets a year to sort of gel, an off-season. But also after that, it's hard to imagine what comes next. With these old dudes, with no draft picks, is it possible that they could be diving off a deep end here? Or is it just not possible to really predict anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the Bucks don't have Anthony Edwards, right? They don't have the rising superstar who will kind of carry the torch when Karl Anthony Towns is done or Rudy Gobert, like when that, it's interesting that question, JR, and it is impossible to predict. I think all I can say is you look at the contracts that are lined up, right? It's Brooke has got 1 year left. Chris has got 1 year in a player option, which I would guess he's going to pick up. Dame's got 3 years. Giannis has 3 years. So the window, to me, was sort of extended with Dame, even though he's an older player. Mm-hmm. Because while you can't predict injury, generally, when you're talking about, the top 15 players, and Dame was the top 15 player, right, an All-NBA. The decline, and there is always decline, it comes from a higher place.
Sure.
So, yeah, like is Dame the same guy as he was when he was 30? No. But at 34, he's still going to be so much better than almost, I mean, if Damian Lillard was an All-NBA guard, see his position list now, but let's pretend there's still positions. If you were to say Dame's an All-NBA guard and next year, I would not be surprised.
Yeah.
Would he be third team? He'd probably be third team, on a team with Giannis, right? Stats would be different, et cetera. And then like Giannis is, I think at 30 is still in that prime window.
Agreed.
And now we're talking about a top 3 player in the world. So, yeah, I think next year is definitely a championship expectation and caliber season. Do they bring Brooke back at 38, in 2 years? That seems unlikely unless, the price comes down to a point where, okay, he's, becoming more of a, instead of a 34-minute guy, 20-minute guy, Chris could still be back. I think Chris is what's funny, JR, is people kind of get mad at him, but his game ages so well. Mm-hmm. Like DeMar DeRozan is still going to get a $40 million, $20 million deal at 5 years older than Chris, right? Now, granted, again, DeMar is a little better player. I guess part of me, JR, is like I don't worry about that. Like I don't know if Bucks fans like what do you care? Like, and what I mean by that is like they are in year 7, right, of a championship window. And while in retrospect, people would say, oh, they've only won one. Like, but they did win one. This is not like, honestly, Boston right now. Boston has been in a window the same length and has yet to win one.
Yeah.
Miami, everyone seems to love #Heat culture, but there aren't any rings in Miami. Like
Heat culture without the bling.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like, so you can't discount the championship that actually occurred. And it just shows how hard it is and how much parity there is. And I don't know. Like, I feel like worrying about 2 to 3 to 5 years from now, like, what's the point in that? When you can, like, it's built for right now.
Yeah.
And, if you, trade Dame for 2 draft picks, like, no, you're not winning anything.
Right.
And the NBA, like, this is not like drafting a starting quarterback. Like, the Bucks have done this. Like, it's in a past lifetime. Like, draft picks don't turn into stuff for years. Like, you're in the thing. You got to, like, try to capitalize it as best you can. in the moment.
Yeah.
And so it's, you worry about 2030 and 2029. Like, that's just what it is when you have one of the best players in the world.
And there are going to be years in the future where the Bucks come into the regular season without a realistic chance to win the championship.
Yeah.
That's going to happen to every franchise.
Yes.
It has happened to the Golden State Warriors in recent. Like it's not the end of the world as long as you have some plan as to how to get back there. And that's for another day because we have no idea what it's
and
gonna
there
look
is
like.
that plan, and that's the thing.
Yeah.
Like, there's a whiteboard of contracts and picks and maybe it's a computer screen nowadays, but it's John Horst and Peter Fagan's job to have that mapped out, right? Like things aren't done with total disregard for stuff. Like that's just not how this works. It may appear that way, and we may be trying to figure out the plan. They're not going to tell us the plan. And like what, JR, I sat down with Wes Edens and 10 years of his ownership. And he's like, this will come to an end. That's what happens. And he's like, that'll be different. We'll see what that looks like.
Yeah.
He's like, you know what? I sort of take a shot at Heat culture for not having a ring, but he brings up the Heat in the ability to retool and not bottom out. And so if one of the majority co-owners of your team is like not really interested in winning 10 games, I think you have to kind of be like, all right, well, maybe that's 4 years from now, but right now, the Bucks can win the championship in 24-25, and that's kind of what they're focused on.
Yeah, that 2015 season where the Bucks won 15 is very endearing in retrospect. 2015, 2013?
Yeah.
I get them all mixed up.
Yeah, 2013-14.
2013,
Giannis's rookie year, Chris's first year in Milwaukee.
So 2013-14. It's very endearing because they won a title. Who doesn't want to think about O.J. Mayo and Shabazz Muhammad? I might be mixing up the years here, but what a great time because they ended
Larry
up...
Sanders.
Yes, Larry Sanders with the thumbs up.
Yeah.
Because it worked out in the end.
Yeah.
You don't want to... Like, the idea of going through those, in the moment, it's a disaster for an organization.
Yeah.
They don't want to have to
And there's
do
no
it.
guarantee. You mentioned Detroit. That's 20 years of crap. Mm-hmm. And like Philadelphia...
They trusted the process all the way
Look,
to the semifinals.
They picked the right guy, right? Like, it took a while for Joel to get healthy enough to be one of the best players in the world.
That was a ballsy pick at the time because he was injured.
Yeah.
Very smart.
And so, they have yet to get out of the second round with Joel.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Like, it's so, and this goes back to the start of the pod, JR, with like the injuries. Like, there's just no, there's the luck. Like, either you're lucky, like the Bucks took Giannis and he turned in what he turned into. They traded for Chris and he turned in, like, nobody predicted that. They all say it. No one knew this.
Also, a sidebar for those who feel the Bucks are lucky. Remember that the best player in the world was a second-round draft pick. Denver Nuggets.
Yeah,
Nikola Jokic, they got lucky too.
Right, and like, or you happen to get the first pick when there's a Victor Wembanyama or when there's LeBron James, like,
or Kawhi Leonard parachutes in and Toronto gets a ring.
Yeah, so there's so many ways and varying degrees of what have you. So yeah, it is disappointing, JR, but I think the emphasis or the desire of like the young guys, what are we doing in 5 years? Like, man, I don't know if it's worth the headspace there because you get to 5 years from now and you're like, remember? Oh, I should have enjoyed that. I don't know. I mean, I'm not gonna tell a fan how to fan, but like it's a hard. I think it's truly in the moment and the window's closing clearly. So sort of just the focus should be, and I think the focus is for ownership, front office, the head coach. This year, next year, let's figure out how to get those guys to the postseason healthy.
Luke Ridnour, Ramon Sessions, the second coming of Ramon Sessions, I believe. Nate Walters.
Nader's going to Nate.
Ursan, Brandon Knight, O.J. Mayo. What a time. 2013, 2014. Great times. I've lost my train of thought. This is what happens when you do a stupid deep dive midway through a podcast. Is there any scenario where Giannis is not back next year?
No.
There's nothing?
No.
Okay. That might be it.
They had to really, some of the national publications had to shoot that out real fast because Dame was like totally happy to be in Milwaukee, ready to come back. So it's like, oh crap, can't write about him. Let's get that Giannis stuff out. No, there's no.
Even those, like, I'm thinking of the article from The Ringer that immediately came out and was like, what is the timeline of Giannis leaving? Even that article, even though the headline was catchy, acknowledges it's not going to be this offseason. It's more like,
because he just signed an extension.
Right.
Wow, again, his third extension in Milwaukee. one of those things.
Maybe he does like it here. I'm sure I've made this before, but I always come back to When Harry Met Sally, where Carrie Fisher's character, he's never going to leave her. Like, no one thinks he's going to leave her. No one thinks that's going to happen. I'm sorry. You mentioned a name that we haven't talked a lot about. That's Patrick Beverley. He does not look good coming out of this series. He threw a basketball twice at some fans in Indiana. He told a reporter that, which apparently is a common occurrence. I did not know this. That she couldn't talk to him unless he subscribed to the pod. Again, the whole subscribe to the pod thing was endearing. It is not as endearing as it used to be, especially when he. And I don't think he played all that poorly. He played like you'd expect an aging veteran who's got a decent defensive reputation. Played okay, I guess. But like, did the Bucks make a mistake there? I mean, we talked about that maybe being a sign that they're getting desperate. Was that what that was? Like, does it feel like they got desperate and made a miscalculation to bring in that energy? I didn't get a sense it was a bad energy, but you look back now and it's like, oh, that really is a bad look to have had him do those things.
I mean, it clearly was a bad look, and it was unacceptable. As part of that scrum, it was, in retrospect, JR was, it was a bad showing. I think, I probably should have handled that better.
Because you were there.
Yeah, I was there.
Okay.
I know all of us in that group, it was a lot of, they all should have left. But the hard part with that, is we had to ask him about the fan, throwing balls at the fan.
Yes, yeah.
And so it was just, it's a unique environment in those situations. And how do you get to that point? He has asked our Lori Nickel and myself and Ben Steele, anyone subscribed to the pod and blah, blah, blah. And obviously, where he took it to the next level was manhandling, a device and then telling her to leave like that. That was beyond, acceptable. And so there's some. I think a lot of us could have done some stuff better there in that moment. As far as, Patrick Beverley as an acquisition, no. I mean, they needed a backup point guard, and they needed a guy who, as Doc Rivers said, wants to defend.
Yeah.
Is certain the starting lineup at the end of the year. They beat Boston without Dame, and they beat Orlando at home, without Giannis and Dame. He had a huge role in their win in Game 5. Had a great game. I guess we'll see. I don't think. Again, the where he's at offensively, like the Celtics didn't even cover him in that game, and he made some shots. I don't know. I just feel like they need a backup point guard. Is he the best option? I guess we'll see. But it feels like, those guys are – that group is you just got to try for something else who can give you more than what he can.
Dude, I'm grossed out by somebody asking journalists if they subscribe to his podcast. I mean, I admit I've enjoyed parts of it. I think it's funny a lot of the time, but it's very self-aggrandizing. Like, it is completely a Patrick Beverley love fest, which it's his podcast. That's his right. But you can't expect people to, like, buy that propaganda to have some sort of business relationship with you. That's ridiculous. Come on, man.
I mean, I can't speak to any of that stuff. It's just a thing he did all year long. He had done it in other cities.
It's gross, man.
It's
gross.
Very annoying. It was part of the shtick. Again, that's how I viewed it. I'm not going to speak for anybody else. I viewed it as a shtick. It was offensive to many, and clearly devolved into like some anger stuff and treatment of people that was not acceptable beyond just sort of like what could have been a bit. I think, and maybe it started as a bit somewhere.
Yeah,
and then turned
real.
into something else, and that's an unfortunate thing, and is pretty much overshadowed anything that he did.
Yeah,
and again, honestly, look, that's a media thing. Like the throwing the balls
right.
at the fans, like that's the work. Like that's what was weird about this is somehow this sort of being rude in this setting overshadowed what could be a lawsuit for assault.
Right.
With fans behind the bench and some other, so just bad all the way around. And, is that worth it going forward for the Bucks? I don't know.
You know who has a really good Q score right now, really good popularity rating in Milwaukee? Mike Budenholzer, former coach of the Milwaukee Bucks. People love Mike Budenholzer. They maybe wanted him gone once upon a time, but not anymore, Jim. Everyone's like, they should have kept Bud. This is, again, going back to that story.
Fire Bud is no longer trending.
I think it's more like hire Bud at this point.
He's still on the payroll.
Yeah, he certainly is. He is counting his money, smoking a cigar. He's probably feeling okay about it.
Yeah.
He's probably fine. He's not gonna rub it in anybody's faces. That's not his way. He's probably okay with how this turned out. Just want to put a postscript on that, on the coaching carousel, on the hiring of Adrian Griffin, the hiring of Doc Rivers. Bold moves. I don't disagree with them in principle. I don't think you can sit here and say, well, they worked out. I mean, it might work out if Doc Rivers ends up building a championship team and with what is kind of a small window at this point. It might work out. Any last thoughts on that? Because you look back, it's really hard to say, wow, they screwed it up by firing Mike Budenholzer. That seems to be the default way of looking at it. I don't know if it's probably more complicated than that, though. So how would you look at it now?
Yeah, I think where the error was hiring Adrian Griffin.
I agree with you 100%.
And they clearly agreed with that by firing Adrian Griffin and hiring Doc Rivers. Like they admitted their mistake, tried to rectify it.
And I don't think it cost them, in the grand scheme of things.
Well, look, where it cost them was the fact that Dame and Giannis had not had their connection.
Yeah.
Defensively, they didn't really have an identity to lean on, to fall back on. For as much as people didn't like Bud and adjustments and whatnot, he was able to get offense going through Brook Lopez when needed. They didn't really have that in the tool bag this year. Hashtag Brooklyn Brook didn't exist. Really could he? Now, he scored some points, and he was an effective player, really helped them stay in the Pacers series. But it's like you couldn't really run offense through Brook like we saw Bud do at times when Giannis was out.
Yeah.
And again, even, I guess, in retrospect, even if they had done all the work with Dame and Giannis, they only played 6 games together after Doc showed up, so maybe that would have been out the window anyway.
Yeah, they had no time to work that out.
But I think, they were just sort of paying. They did pay for some of the fault lines that were kind of ruptured throughout the first part of the season later.
Mm-hmm.
Doc was trying to, patch some stuff together that, other things slipped through the cracks or they weren't prepared in some ways. Now some of it worked. Look, JR, they threw the zone out. What Doc really was never a guy who did zone much. That worked at times. They started that under Adrian Griffin. They switched 1 through 5 to help get back in the series against the Pacers. That's not a Bud thing. They did that under Adrian Griffin.
Mm-hmm.
Adrian had Bobby, blitzing pick and rolls. It worked early in the year. Some teams figured it out. Now, there were some broader schematic issues that Doc tightened up, but Bobby did that under Adrian Griffin. So, the things they hired Griff for and they did some of, they did later. And Jay Crowder told me, he's like, yeah, man, the fact that we did that stuff early helped us.
Mm-hmm.
And, we needed that. That was one of the reasons Bud was fired, right? Break some of that rigidity, be able to adjust game to game or within a game.
Yeah, of course.
So, I'm not going to totally crap on that because it worked. They needed it. But, it was, I think, clearly not starting the way they did. I mean, maybe there's a world where they trade for Damian in September instead of October so he can get to Milwaukee, do open gyms with Giannis and the guys, get his conditioning, where he's like, I didn't do stuff because I couldn't get hurt, working out. And that happens. That's not a Damian thing. That happens all the time for guys who are free agents or waiting on a trade.
I don't know if they trade for Lillard at all.
But
see, Mike Budenholzer's coach. Do you?
No. But I mean, Bud's fired. That's not a. They're not. Okay, needed that had to happen.
Okay.
Yeah, there's no what about that. That had to happen. But again, they were trying to orchestrate some stuff in Miami, and I don't know when Milwaukee truly came in. So maybe that was totally impossible to trade for him on September 1st, as opposed to September 27th.
Yeah.
So I think they did the end of year. A lot of that was rooted in beginning of the year And what, should Doc Rivers have been on the list to begin with at the start of the year? Maybe, but honestly, JR, Doc's a lot like Bud. And they were clearly trying to get away from that. And so, it's just, it was one of those things, I think, early on that you can root a lot of this back to the summer, the early fall, early parts of the season. But I think the coaching stuff, I think they hired the right guy. I think Doc is the blend for all of his faults and all the people around the country want to knock him for. I think in Milwaukee, they needed the experience, the stern voice, the ability to coach well and manage situations, but they also needed a guy who was a little more player-friendly than Bud. And so I think they found that guy. The core guys are all bought in. And, going forward, I think they're in better shape in that regard. So they got to the right person. It just clearly January 25th or whatever was too late.
All right, Jim, we're about to wrap this up here. Who's going to win the NBA Finals? Who's going to bring it home?
Wow.
I, by the way, am personally convinced that the Minnesota Timberwolves, after watching them against Denver.
After one game.
I'm absolutely a windsock that way. Let's go, one game, and I am sold. But they're very fun. I really enjoy watching them play. So I would love to see the Timberwolves. And there's a small market component that I think is cool for Bucks fans to have somebody, again, a franchise that has not had success, find that success. It's kind of what Denver was a little bit last year. So I would love to see that happen.
I don't know. There's injury stuff obviously going on in Cleveland and Boston.
Cleveland just barely got through.
And it's. But if Jared Allen's good and Porzingis isn't, I'm curious there because Boston has no size. That could be, and Cleveland can really defend if those two big guys are in. As we record this, I don't know Jared Allen's status. I think the Timberwolves-Denver thing is so interesting because Tim Connolly built the Nuggets, and now he's building the team to beat the Nuggets.
Yeah.
So how about I totally wimp out on this. But all I'll say is I think there will be a sixth different champion in 6 years.
I like that, yeah.
I think Denver has enough flaws. Again, how hard it is to continue this. They lost so many key pieces. They are very thin. Jamal Murray's still dealing with a calf. I'm not predicting an injury, but it's maybe Denver beats Minnesota. Maybe they get to the finals. And I don't know. But I'll just go with, I think, the parity of opportunity, Adam Silver's dream, which is not that David Stern's. David Stern loved the dynasties. I think there'll be a sixth different champion in 6 years.
Bring me the small market metropolis of Oklahoma City against Minnesota and Cleveland against Indiana in the Final Four. I want that.
I don't think Cleveland's good. Or Indianapolis. I don't think Indiana's
No, I don't either.
That's the one I think.
Bucks fans don't even want that. But, I just love the idea of small market chaos. I think
I think wouldn't the NBA love a Cleveland OKC?
Yes, they will.
Adam Silver might like it.
He would like it.
I don't know if the broadcast partners love it.
No, they're huge Knicks fans from now on, pretty much. It's
Knicks,
the Knicks.
A Knicks-Boston Eastern Conference final.
Boston too. Boston too.
Denver's not even really on TV in their own market, but I guess now that doesn't matter.
No, that's
so
they're probably
all in on Dallas.
Yeah,
Dallas is a big market.
Yeah, you're right.
So they're probably all in on Dallas.
Dallas is inoffensive to me. They're fun. Luke is
fun.
Luke is fun. They play.
If they get to the final, you can almost pencil in Doncic for MVP.
Kyrie is a reason why you believe that a guy like Dame can keep playing at a high level deep into.
Kyrie's a little younger.
Yeah,
but,
he is. But has been through injuries and is still balling. Really high level.
Kyrie got hurt during the season.
Yeah.
He wasn't eligible for all the awards. He played less than 65 games, I think. But he's healthy now.
I wonder if they're going to interrogate the awards thing because in the first season, granted it's just one data point, but you had so many injuries coming into the playoffs with Jimmy Butler and Giannis and
Tyrese Halliburton's not healthy.
Right, Tyrese Halliburton's not healthy, and you had guys. Giannis really went out to as many games as possible. There was no load management. Now, obviously, you had a guy with major injury like Joel Embiid, but for the most part, the guys who were really pushing to get to those marks, they come away with injuries. So it's the NBA doesn't want this part of the season to be checkered by that. I would have to think.
It is unfortunate. I think in the moment we're always like, everybody's hurt, but I think there's always a key, there's always injuries across the board.
Of course.
And look, we mentioned Dante early, but the Bucks were hurt. It's just that when and who got hurt the year they won it all didn't really affect them.
No, you're right.
And and sometimes that happens. Sometimes guys do get hurt throughout a series or whatever, and they get healthy and it's better. And sometimes it's just guys get, it's just the one thing that it's so unsatisfying to wrap this up. It's just so unsatisfying for the players, for the coaches, for the fans, because you don't feel like you got beat.
You just feel like
you don't even feel like you lost.
Yeah.
It's just this. That's sort of why I wrote that was it. For the season,
that's a good headline.
It's just it's so unsatisfying in so many ways, because you really can't do much about it.
It reminds me of the feeling after 1 month of baseball, and you want to say, well, that guy is terrible because he's batting this, and this guy can't pitch, but it's only 1 month out of, it's 1/6 of the season. You can't make those judgments yet, but you want to. That's how I feel about this season. I want to make all these judgments. This is where they need to improve, but it might have worked. It all might have worked. Yeah. Everything that they did might have ended up working. We have no idea. So now it's a question of, do they run it back? I'm sure they'll tweak, but
yeah, I think this part of the Bucks chapter, I think after next year,
yes,
regardless of
different conversation.
Yeah, regardless of outcome, from the very best outcome to the one we're currently in, which is unsatisfactory because of injury and a what if. That'll be, I think, a fair, because it was sort of this 2-year, this year, next year kind of thought, maybe a third, depending how things go. Then it's like, oh, okay, that did or didn't work for whatever reasons.
Yeah.
But you're right. Hopefully, if you're a Bucks fan or employee or part of the team, it's did we have a chance? And I feel like this year you're exiting with, man, we didn't even have a chance. We didn't have, a real shot at what this all could have been because of things out of everyone's control. So we'll see. They'll have to, trim around the edges and see what happens.
The soleus muscle becoming the star of the Milwaukee Bucks postseason, for better or definitely for worse. And that is it. So we will chat again on the Point Forward podcast as news allows. There's bound to be some draft talk coming up into our future. Free agency shortly, that same
real
window.
Quick, at the end, I'm going to shout out to our guy Lon at Pfizer Form Security. If you made it to the end of this pod, big fan.
Yeah, Lon.
And so we are a fan of yours.
Thank you, Lon.
And all of you who listen, who have subscribed.
Yes.
And watched on YouTube all year long.
A lot on YouTube, a lot at jsonline.com. Still plenty more, of course, content there for you. Jim Owczarski written a lot of it. Lori Nickel, Ben Steele, everybody who was heavily involved. So keep up with that. We will be with you throughout the postseason or the off season from time to time. But thanks for listening to this edition of the Point Forward podcast. We'll talk to you again very soon. Bye-bye.